Viewer discretion is advised.
It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. And it absolutely will not stop. Ever. Until you are dead.
So a few questions are probably popping into your head right now. The first being, why the fuck was this video recommended to me by YouTube? And the second being, what is SCP Secret Laboratory? The answer to that first question is, yeah, I got nothing for you there. I'm sorry. But the answer to that second question is also more difficult and complicated. The reason for that is that while surface level, yes, this is a game, a multiplayer one where a group of people play as monsters, while the other players are divided up into various teams, the problem lies in the fact that in order to properly understand SCP as a concept, you have to look at its base source material. And for that, may I direct your attention to scp/wiki.net, otherwise known as the SCP Foundation. The kind of premise behind the site is that there's things called SCPs, which are various anomalous objects that can be sentient or inanimate, and the Foundation exists primarily to protect humanity from these anomalous objects. And as such, the site consists entirely of fan-generated horror articles similar to the likes of creepypasta. However, it's generally thought to have a much better quality of writing as opposed to said creepypasta site. This is due 100% to the site's strict guidelines for articles. There's no article that's able to stay on the site if it can't maintain a above -10 rating. The contents of this site was the precursor genesis for the game SCP Containment Breach. Containment Breach relied entirely on the site's user-generated articles for the setting of the game. Every monster, hallway, and even most objects were directly lifted from the SCP website. Some of you may have heard of SCP Containment Breach, in no small part thanks to people like...
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and welcome back to SCP Containment Breach.
Yeah, Markiplier was pretty much the largest YouTuber I could think of when I thought of SCP. In any case, however, this game was then the basis for SCP Secret Laboratory. So in total, you have a game based off of a game that was based off of a website that is based off of user-generated content. So the next logical question then becomes, what does SCP Secret Laboratory offer to the table? Well, the answer, multiplayer. As I briefly had stated earlier in the video, some of the players will play as the actual SCPs from SCP Containment Breach that were based off of the, you know what, this is actually going to get really stupidly complicated, so we're going to simplify this. Essentially, all you need to know is that some players will play as essentially monsters, some players will play as what are prisoners, some will play as scientists, some will play as military enforcement meant to recontain the monsters, and some will play as complete fucking assholes. We'll get into the game a bit more in a little bit here, but before we do, I feel the need to make a quick disclaimer here. The creator of the game, Hubert Mazka, sorry if I butchered your name, has made a Patreon page where you can support the development of the game. I, myself, have given to this Patreon page, and while I don't necessarily believe that it colors my opinions of the game, I feel as though I should mention it anyways. This can end up kind of being a hot topic issue, so I didn't want anybody to accuse me of being biased, just without stating so here's your only warning. With that, let's go ahead and get into the game, shall we? Let's go ahead and waste no time. What did the multiplayer aspects add to the game? The answer...
No! Open it! Open it! Get in here! Run! Oh my god! Go, go, go!
Don't run, hold still. Thank you.
I didn't do it. There it goes.
Dear God. No.
One of the most fun experiences I've had in games for a long time. Even in what I would call a very unfinished alpha state, this has to be one of the most impressive, inventive, and clever ideas for a game. Sure, we've seen games like this with Friday the 13th, and many games trying to copy the Friday the 13th model. The difference, of course, is that this is SCP, and sure, you can easily brush that off with, well, that's just an aesthetic choice. There's no actual difference between this and Friday the 13th, and you would be incredibly wrong by saying that. Firstly, the teams is obviously the biggest thing that changes the game, since some players will play as the monsters, some will play as the various helpless combatants, such as the scientists and the prisoners, and of course not forgetting the military teams as well. It allows for the game to create a new kind of tense atmosphere, one where you don't just have to worry about the things going bump in the facility. While I can definitely see that the teams idea could be done in other games, not specifically maybe a horror game, and certainly not in the way that SCP does it. That may seem arrogant, but it's because that SCP is set up the way it is that it lent itself so well to this kind of setup. Going back to the SCP wiki, it's not just the various SCPs that help make up the website. The MTF, the Mobile Task Force, as well as the Chaos Insurgency are things that are directly canon in the universe of SCP. Well, at least most of the canons. I'd assume that all of the canons have the MTF and the SCPs, otherwise that'd be getting really confusing. If you perhaps don't know what I'm talking about, I'll go ahead and briefly state it here. The SCP site, in order to allow for greater creative freedom, also has what it's called multiple canons. These are essentially whatever authors want to use as the rules and logic of their world that they're trying to build. As a result, creators are allowed a huge amount of freedom when creating various fictions of work, as they're not tied to one specific canon. This is why something like Containment Breach is able to exist in the way it does, where it just kind of picked and chose whatever SCPs it wanted for the setting of its game. These SCPs aren't locked down to wherever the canon demands them to be, so long as it doesn't conflict with the actual SCP's technical report history, it's pretty much fair game. Obviously, this is the biggest thing working in SCP Secret Laboratory's favor, and as such, the various teams format is able to be deepened and expanded upon much better than it would be in something like a traditional horror setting. I might have to bite my tongue on that one though, because I can definitely see this becoming very popular and a lot of people wanting to adapt their work to it to better take advantage of this new gameplay style. Multiplayer it may be, this is still a horror game. And what's a horror game without some monsters? The titular SCPs, as it were. Secret Laboratory certainly has some, but it's definitely not as extensive as the website, though it's hard to beat close to 3,000 entries. SCP Secret Laboratory certainly doesn't have that many. In fact, right now, it only has about 4. Operative phrase being, for right now. At the time of recording, the developer of the game is currently working on SCP-096 to be added to the game. I know I, personally, can't wait for his addition. It's not to say that the current SCPs are bad. In fact, I'd say that they're hard candidates to beat as some of my favorite antagonists to play as in video games. With SCPs like 106 and 049, it's definitely quite the tall order to try to top these two as current, though the website is quite expansive. Hopefully the creator of the game can utilize the website and add even more SCPs that we haven't seen, from things such as Containment Breach. I'd love to go into more detail about the SCPs right now, but I'm saving that for a different section of the video. For right now, I'm just going to finish up talking about the game itself and why I think it's definitely worth your time. So we've talked about the teams, the monsters, what else is there to talk about? Well, clearly not everybody in the game is going to be able to play as an SCP every single game. There's people that are going to get stuck as the scientist or D-class, you know, essentially the prisoners. I like to refer to them as cannon fodder. Then of course there's going to be the people who spawn as the military task force. You know, the nuisances with guns. Okay, maybe that's extremely uncharitable. If it wasn't for the military groups such as the MTF or the Chaos Insurgency, the game would be really unbalanced in favor of the SCPs. So their addition is quite necessary for what it is. And they're fun to play as in their own right. The MTF I actually think is better than Chaos, because Chaos is usually just players devolving into being a bunch of fucking dicks. This unfortunately means that scientists in D-Class get shafted the most. Like I said, they're the cannon fodder. They're meant to be the easy kills for the SCPs early in the game. That's not to say that you can't play them skillfully. The scientists in D-Class can be their own kind of fun, if extremely limited. The next thing we're going to cover is probably a bit smaller in comparison, but it's no less important for the success of the game. And that's the fact that this game has map seeds. Yep. If you don't know what that means, time to start praying to RNGesus that you don't get fucked! Because if you haven't been able to put 2 and 2 together yet, the game has randomly generated maps on a multiplayer game, no less. That's actually pretty impressive for what it is. Though considering that the game is being developed by 3 people, oh yeah, did I forget to mention that, by the way? That means that it's still kind of janky, and you can absolutely get fucked by map generation. And when I say that, I don't mean, oh, I didn't get the cards or the guns that I needed to be able to escape the facility. No, I mean literally 2 rooms can spawn on top of each other, and now you're not able to use the elevator at all. Yeah, so very clearly, it needs a lot of work. But thankfully, the game is still in what the developers are calling a beta. I pretty much prefer they call it an alpha, because that's what I really feel like it is in its current state, but small things. So we'll go ahead and take the time to finish up this section with what each players actually do throughout the game. Obviously, as you can expect, if you're SCP, your goal is to kill everybody, whereas if you're D-Class or Scientist, your goal is to try to escape. You'll have to accomplish this, however, by obtaining keycards or upgrading them through the use of SCP-914. However, that comes with a few caveats. You don't just win when you escape the facility as Scientist or D-Class. Instead, if you're D-Class, you'll respawn as a Chaos Insurgency, whereas if you're a Scientist, you'll respawn as an MTF Soldier. As MTF, your goal is to rescue the remaining Scientists, recontain or kill the remaining SCPs, find a way to deal with D-Class, and kill any Chaos Insurgency if they're still in the facility. By contrast, if you're Chaos Insurgency, your goal is to rescue any remaining D-Class, deal with the rest of the Scientists, and kill all MTF. You don't have to worry about the SCPs though. You can actually win if all of them are still alive. One final thing to be aware of is that you don't have to worry so much when you die, because even if you do, you can still respawn later as either MTF or Chaos. Additionally, if you were killed by 049, he can actually respawn you as a zombie, so that's another way you can come back from the grave. It helps keep the game dynamic, as players don't die even when they die. It makes for a fun and intense game, as one might imagine. Hopefully you've made your decision on whether or not you want to play the game now. However, if you're still kind of on the fence, here's something that might convince you. It's free, 100%. You only have to put money into it if you want to on their Patreon page to support it. So I decided to save all of my suggestions and criticisms for this section of the video. Initially, I planned to go way in depth and do all of my critiques and suggestions, but that just turned out to be way too long. So I'm gonna just touch on a few and try to highlight what I think are the most important ones. I'm obviously not gonna cover all of them. There's just way too much. I might try to put this into a Google Doc or something. I have no doubt a large majority of these will be obsolete as the game is improved, so that's another reason I'm kind of cutting this down a bit. We're just gonna go ahead and kind of jump in it from here, and then we'll try to see a good stopping point. Let's start at the top, as it were, with initial criticisms, or more precisely things that I'll notice as soon as I enter the game. To start with the main menu, although I personally didn't find it too bad, I can definitely see some people's criticisms of the sort of disorienting layout. This is definitely my weakest point, though I found it no less valid to mention. I think this one could just be fixed by doing a simple UI change, honestly. Moving on from there, let's get into the settings really quick. The very first immediate thing I noticed with the settings is that there's no way to rebind my controls, and I personally find that unacceptable. While I realize that this is an early build of the game, I really do think that this probably needs to be addressed really quickly, as I often use the rebinding of controls to figure out what some of the controls in the game actually are for most things that I play. I'll definitely concede that this is a much more minor point, but I found it no less valid to bring up. The next thing in settings that I'd say needs to be adjusted is audio sliders. There needs to be more than just the master volume for the game, as I like to be able to adjust how loud players are, how loud the actual music is, and how loud the game effects are, as well as the master slider on top of that. Also, I just feel like the settings UI overall needs to be kind of adjusted. I got a weird glitch where I could click on the sound volume and then open up the resolution screen, and in general I found the settings screen for shadow, post-processing, details, and light rendering mode to just be kind of weird. I feel like it could have just been all on one screen and just have a scroll wheel for it. Lastly, as far as menus are concerned, I feel like a menu screen that explains controls for the characters, whoever they might be, SCP, NTF, whoever, needs to be a menu option in the game, so that way new players can read this and try to be able to figure out how to play the game easier when they first start. Kind of basic things that, like, you know, explain the controls, that explain abilities that SCPs have and how to use them, what certain objects do, what the cards are kind of for, how to use the guns and reload them. Just kind of simple things that give a basic explanation. Next up on our list is basically talking about server UIs, or more specifically the menu of which you pick a server. It's pretty crap. You know, despite things like the glitch that you can get where you try to join a server but it's actually full, but because you just opened the game up, it's going to send you that message and then it's going to essentially restart the game for some reason. You know, just small glitches like that for right now. The absolute biggest thing with this server UI right now is just the unbelievable lack of information that you get from it. I mean, I realize that this is a multiplayer game and those are inherently more difficult to make, but unfortunately that's just the grave that the developers made for themselves when they decided to do this. As of right now in the game, the information you get is pretty much nothing. There's no ping, there's no player count to tell you if the server's full, there's no country of origin, there's just no real amount of information that you can actually use to discern whether or not you want to join the server or not. I mean, without stuff like this, there's pretty much no point to even something like what the game has, which is filtering option. Because really, what's there to filter? Just the server's name? Okay. There's people asking for functions like being able to favorite a server, but until things like this get filtered out, I mean, I'm just not even gonna want to bother. I want to know if I have a stable ping, the server's even in the same country I'm in, so that way I have less likely of a chance of running into ping problems. And I want to know if the damn server is even full, and whether or not I'm gonna be able to join it. I mean, I want to be fair with my criticisms here. I don't want to just be blaming things that they can't control, like whether or not a server is just crap, but I mean, like, stuff like this, I'm not asking you to fix netcode, of which I have no clue about. It's just basic UI things. Hopefully they can get around to it. I mean, this seems simple enough, so I hope that maybe they can just fix it. This next section is general in-game stuff, and it's unfortunately really long. So let's just dig into this. Firstly, as I'm sure many people who've tried the game have experienced, you're not really told exactly what to do in the game. I mean, sure, you start the game and you're immediately met with an objective and a tooltip as soon as you start, but what your controls are, how you accomplish said objective, nothing in the game is conveyed at the very beginning. You kind of have to figure it out yourself, or do what I did and look up online what the controls are, and then try to figure it out from there. This is why I suggested a screen in the menus that explain how character controls work, because when you start the game and you just have no idea how to do anything, it's really not a fun time for anyone. I mean, most players start the game and they don't even realize that they have an inventory or even abilities in case of their SCPs. Oh, and that inventory screen, that's a real waste of potential here. I know that it's trying to copy Containment Breach, which purposely had a limited heads-up display, but in a multiplayer game like this, you could at least have an objective window, something that players could open up and do a quick glance to see what their objectives are at any moment. Also, please, for the love of God, everybody's been asking for this, and I know that I'm going to be one of the last people to say it, but we need a player list in-game, so that way we can have a mute function, so that way we can mute all the fucking soundboard assholes. There are arguments for why not to have a mute function in the game, and I hear them. However, the bad just outweighs the good in this situation. You need to be able to ignore these people because their obnoxiousness just ruins the game for people. Okay, on to a less passionate criticism. I really feel like there needs to be respawn timers for when people are dead. It doesn't need to specifically tell them when they'll get back, but more of just when players will respawn. Building on top of that, I actually had a suggestion for a radio room in the game. My initial idea is that the initial respawn timers will be much longer unless players find this and then use it to either contact more chaos or MTF. And depending on which one they choose, the next respawn timer will not only be decreased, but also the one they chose will have an increased chance of spawning next time. The next thing I'm going to address is the combat system. I think it needs a little bit of an overhaul. Maybe overhaul actually is a bit much. I feel like the weapon damage from the guns needs to be reevaluated. I feel like the MTF weapon should just deal more damage. I feel like the chaos should deal less, because unless I'm mistaken, it feels like right now the guns deal the same exact amount of damage per bullet, and it means that the chaos weapons are just way better. They deal more damage per second, which means that if each bullet's doing 10 damage, they shoot faster, therefore their overall DPS is just way better. Also, I feel like all the melee hit detection needs to be adjusted, because as SCPs, it's just really fucking hard to hit people, and it ends up kind of fucking you. Additionally, as a minor suggestion, I feel like there maybe should be a fist weapon in the game, probably only for D class, so that way they can try to wrestle scientists for keycards. Speaking of things like keycards, let's move on to SCP-914. It needs more purpose. It shouldn't just be just the keycard upgrading machine. I mean, it can do so much more than that. It should be able to do things like upgrading the guns, upgrading... Okay, well, there's only the flashlight, but that's another thing too, is that there also needs to be more items in the game. But definitely 914 needs some more purpose to it. And on the subject of things like 914, I kind of feel like there maybe should be some hazard rooms. There's cameo rooms right now referencing other SCPs that were in containment breach, but I think, for instance, like with SCPs 012, it should be an actual room where players can accidentally die from going into. Hell, it can be a fun and interesting way to try to catch other players, for instance D-Class or MTF, and trying to trick them into going into these rooms so that they'll kill themselves and you can steal their items and try to escape better. Okay, we're gonna finish things up here. For the sake of brevity, we're just gonna move into my next major subject. I'm unfortunately just skipping a lot, but I just couldn't do it. The video would have been way too long. Alright, I mentioned I was gonna do this earlier in the video, so we're gonna go ahead and finish up the suggestions and criticism sections with this. So let's get right into the SCPs. To start off with, I feel like the SCPs should have their own version of respawning. I don't know exactly how you would do that, but since the games are constantly ending with MTF versus Chaos, and the whole point of the game is that this is SCP, there really needs to be a way for these guys to respawn, to keep the danger and the actual point of the game intact. Okay, that's my only one kind of minor thing slash suggestion. We're gonna go right into each SCP point by point now. We'll start with 173. I don't really have any actual complaints about any of the SCPs. I just think there needs to be ways for them to work a little bit better. They're intimidating, sure, but they're not as good or as tight as they kind of need to be. And with the exception of one other who we'll get into, 173 suffers the worst. The hit detection just utterly fucks him. He really needs to be able to hit players better. Plus, other SCPs need to be able to find a way to blind players so that he can get kills while he's around other SCPs. Also, players just either need to have manual blinking or blinking 100% of the time. People are alerted way too quickly to his presence when they notice that they're blinking before they even see him. Alright, moving on to 106, my man. While I like the fact that they added the option to recontain him like you did in the game, it's just too easy right now. Players are rushing straight to it and just fucking the player who's playing as 106. Like, if they try to do the recontainment process, he needs to be able to have a chance to escape just like he did in the game from the players fucking up the containment procedure. On to 094. He's pretty simple. The zombies just need to have better hit detection. Also, they should have the ability to sprint, and players killed by the zombies should be able to still be revived by the plague doctor if he's close enough and within the time frame. 079. Oh god, where to begin? Everything on him needs to be fucking redone. And they've kind of been doing that, but not because they've recognized that he needs adjusting, but rather because after they updated the doors, he no longer worked with them. As a result, he's been temporarily removed from the game, and I just wasn't able to get footage from before he was removed. My suggestions for him is that A, he needs better convenience, a way to open a screen and see what he can actually fucking do. He needs a fucking map for damn sure. He needs better ways to help the SCPs. Like I said, he could do something like blind players by turning off the fucking light for 173, and he should never be able to spawn by himself. That is a fucking death sentence immediately for whoever is playing him. Okay, so that wraps up that section. Originally, I planned to also suggest some other SCPs that the game creator could add in, but I just gotta wrap this up, so maybe I'll do that in another video. Despite all my criticisms and the way I've been yelling, I do really fucking like this game. It's weird. It just kind of grows on you. I mean, it's an immediately gripping concept, but like, you stay into it because, you know, for the most part, the community is really fun and receptive to it. And it's a really neat concept. That's why I supported this game on Patreon in the first place. So despite how negative I might be, or the fact that I had so many criticisms about the game that I couldn't even fit in this video, that doesn't mean that I don't really love this game. I just really feel like it needs a lot of work on it, for sure. And I really hope that Hubert Mosca, sorry if I still butchered your name, is planning on putting a lot of work into the game. Because I'll say it right now, if this is how the finished product kind of ends up being, with only a few improvements and a few gameplay additions, I will drop this game like a fucking rock. Sure, it can still be fun in its current state, but I am supporting this more on the potential than I am how the game kind of is currently. It's still really fun currently, don't get me wrong, but it better improve. I am sick of fucking Christ of games just getting into early access, coming out, quotation marks, of early access, and being almost the fucking same as when they came into early access. Now, I know that Secret Laboratory isn't actually in the early access program, but it's a alpha beta and it feels like one, and it's fun, but a lot of work, man. A lot of work. You know, it is diamond in the rough. It's still really fun for what it is, but you really got to refine it because there is something amazing underneath this, and if the potential of that is wasted, god damn, I weep for everything. Alright, I'm gonna finish this video with a promise, because that won't bite me in the ass. Hopefully, if I figure out how to use YouTube annotations, the next video you should be able to click on is a video on actually how to play the game, where I detail exactly how the controls work and how the other SCPs and characters can function. And also, because I want to be vague and mysterious and not lock myself down to something, maybe there's another video that you can click on to view. I hope you enjoyed the video. Any feedback is welcomed. I actually want to see how receptive people are. And you know, maybe actually try subscribing, see if you want to see me do more stuff. I'm honestly going to decide whether or not I'm going to try doing more stuff like this based on whether or not people are actually super receptive to it. With that, I've blabbed enough. Bye.